Welcome to episode 4 of Marathon Talk, powered by Abbott World Marathon Majors. In this week's show, we'll talk about that hot, humid, high-octane TCS New York City Marathon. We'll also speak about the champions of Series 14 of the Abbott World Marathon Majors Series. The curious case of the tram-travelling policeman? Yes, you heard me right. And then we'll catch up with 6-star owner and New York City Marathon finisher Ben Wickham.
Deena, it's been lovely to hear you do that intro. Last time we spoke, you were sitting in the back of a car and go around the New York City Marathon course commentating. I'm excited to hear how it went.
Oh, yeah. You know, whenever you take that job, you cross your fingers for good weather just as much as the runners are because you're sitting in the back of an open air vehicle. It was such an amazing experience being a gorgeously warm day for spectators, a little warm for the runners themselves, but it was so great to see how many champions were in front of me. Like you could picture the race going a million different directions. Des Linden, the 2018 Boston Marathon champion, was out in front for a while. She had a great buildup. She told us that. She told the press that before the race. So she could have run away with it, but everybody kept their eyes on her. They reeled her back in. And it was a great, great day. And the series championships were on the line as well for Abbott. So there was a lot at stake on that day.
There was. I mean, we'll get into talking about the conditions and the heat and the effect that it had on some of the participants, particularly in that men's race. We'll talk about the women's race and the wheelchair races and some of the other entrants in the field. Just before we do, though, like when you do commentary, we spoke a little bit last time about you preparing and the notes and the kind of diligent process of understanding the race. But then when you go to do that, like live, you know, you're there and it's live. I'm sure events throw up all sorts of unexpected challenges and things because like you're going along in a vehicle and you sort of can't control everything. So what was it really like? Give us the insider scoop on like not the commentator bit, but the real life bit of Deena doing this.
Right. You mean when the producer throws it to you and gives you about 5 seconds to sum up what's going on in front of you for the past 20K, you're like, oh my gosh, I have so much information. And he's like, wrap it up, Deena. What? I only got in 1 sentence. And then there was one time when we were making this turn on the course and the vehicle slowed down a little too much. And Edna Kiplagat actually tripped on the back of our vehicle. No. And I nearly had a heart attack. She was in the lead, which you don't normally see. She's kind of like that quiet runner that sits within the pack, but she was right there. And my heart skipped a beat. I was so scared. And then I really diligently watched her to make sure that she wasn't shaking off something that happened in that trip up. So thank goodness she was paying attention.
And is it a tiring thing to do? Because of course, I know that there's tens of thousands of people running marathons and you know what it's like to run a marathon too, but you know, like having to concentrate and bring almost an inside view of what's happening at the marathon to thousands of people who are not actually watching the marathon. Do you find it fatiguing in a different way?
It is fatiguing. I think it'd be more tiring to be in the booth because you're on the whole time. Yeah. The stress for me is that I have something to say every minute of that course because it's unfolding in front of me, but I also don't have the time to say it. So something like all these fleeting moments pass and then you're on to the next mile and you have to think of something to say concisely in that moment. So the stress is just all those little moments that you're trying to piece together a couple concise sentences to share with people who are watching in their living room when you don't really know when it's going to be your time, if the equipment works at all, and you get any time to say something. So it is very stressful. I take the day off of running that day because I am just wiped out afterwards. And a lot of times I like to come home right away after a race. I stay there and I get in a good meal and a good night's sleep and make my journey home the next day. So it comes with a lot of stresses, but I will say that the weather being as warm as it was less stress on my physical body doing it.
Yeah. And do you go back after that, kind of hang your headphones up and your mic up and think, I nailed a couple of sentences then.
Never.
Have you got any takeaways that you never think, what about clangers? Did you think, I wish I'd never said that?
The only thing I think about is how I should have done a better job. And so there's no, and I've said this before, in my experience, there is no positive feedback loop for me. I just berate myself for not getting in more or not answering a question thrown from the booth in a way that would have showcased someone a little better. So I berate myself, continue to today, wishing I had gotten in all of those accomplishments that so-and-so has gotten and really played up the race between Gotchatam Ghebreselassie and Lona Salpeter, who were actually in a battle for winning the series. If Lona won the race, she would have taken that series win away from Ghebreselassie. And I knew that. It wasn't on the tip of my tongue when Sharon Lokedi, the eventual winner in her debut race, ran away from them. But there was also a race within a race right behind that. So those little things that just don't flow out quickly enough.
Well, they did just then.
Yeah.
It's easy to be, isn't it easy to be critical in hindsight and to think, well, it's probably a bit like when you dissect a marathon performance.
Right.
You think, well, I wish I could, I could have done 10 seconds. If I'd have done that mile slightly differently, I'd run that line slightly differently, I'd taken that turn, or I'd thought about this, maybe I could have got 10 seconds here or 5 seconds there.
But your next race, you do have a chance to redo that. I don't have a chance to redo showcasing them. I always picture their mothers watching. And so I feel this really big burden to represent them well.
Yeah, that's what a lovely thing to do. Picture your mum watching and then think, right, I've got to let your mum know just how good you're doing.
Yes.
And so did you get to run? I'll tell you a little bit about my running afterwards. When you're in New York City, did you go running?
I did. There's a lot of group meetups. Some of us on the production team met up with Sam Grotwald, the professional athlete director of the race, to pick his brain in the early morning. So it was really great getting into Central Park and getting in some runs with people, because that's how we connect. And there's no better way to share the miles than being in Central Park on New York City Marathon weekend. Are you recovered from your run? Last time we spoke, you were banged up from falling on the coast, on the Jurassic
I fell over
coast.
in front of two people, didn't I? Yeah, I fell over, yeah. I think I may had a really painful, I think it may have broken toe. It's okay now. Yeah, it's okay. I've been running. I actually did, and if anyone is listening who's listened to the show for a number of years, they will not be able to guess the session that I did. But I haven't done a session for a while, and last time we spoke on the show, I said I was struggling a little bit for motivation of finding my runs kind of all like anonymously blending from one run into the next. And, you lose focus of your direction when that happens, and all your runs merge into a messy kind of week of nothingness. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to do a session. And my favourite session of all time is 6 times 3 minutes. 3 minutes at like a good sort of tempo threshold pace with about a minute's rest in between. And I love that session. I haven't done it for ages. So I banged out 6 times 3 minutes as a little pick-me-up.
So Martin, on the rest, is it active recovery, or is it more like a fartlek where you're slowing down?
So my goal is to run each of those 3 minutes at a good, consistent threshold pace. So I'm working each one. But my minute rest in between is jogging, so super slow. But I'm still moving. But like I might go from, 6-minute miling to 9-minute miling, and then just keep it like that. It's just a fun session to do, It gives me a little pickup. I tell you, it lets you know where you are as well.
Yeah, it gives you good feedback.
When you can't hold the last 2. Yeah, absolutely. I've also been watching my kids play loads of sport. One of my boys, Bo, plays a load of soccer or football here in the UK. Soccer over there in the US for you, Deena.
Soccer's still going?
Yes, we are.
It's like the longest season ever.
Yeah, we have just started in the UK the football season, and so I have spent 3 out of 7 evenings last week stood in the rain watching football. All good though. Right, come on, let's move on with this show. You've already mentioned it already, but it was pretty unbelievable conditions for a November day in New York. And I was thinking about this when I was watching some of the coverage, and Like, it doesn't seem like that long ago. In fact, some years in New York City, people are in gloves and hats, right? And it's cold. Yet this year, it was unbelievably different and humid and warm, and that resulted in some very difficult running.
I think the worst part of it was the humidity. Like when I was looking, like 60 degrees, like that seems pretty manageable, but the humidity was so thick. You could it was like an effort just to breathe sitting there because the air was so thick. I've never really experienced that. I obviously don't live in a humid place, but I'd never experienced sitting there and having to take deep breaths to make sure I was getting in enough oxygen. But you could really see it take its toll in the men's race, the professional men's race.
Oh, absolutely. The leader of the first, I think, halfway, right, and led up to about 18, Brazil's Daniel do Nascimento, let's just say he was a bit enthusiastic.
I'll say from watching him in the past, that's his style of racing. He's excitable. He's just this guy that is all in 100%. And on a day like that, given how warm and humid it was, you knew it was going to take its toll on him. I'm surprised that he lasted that long. The bathroom break, I think, was less of a bathroom break and more of I'm breaking down here. He even went to step out of the bathroom and kind of stumbled and had to get his legs back under him. So it was tragic to see, but the patient pack behind him was hunting him down 1 minute at a time.
Yeah, patient pack. What a great description of the rest of the field. Of course, Daniel went out world record pace for the first 10K. Now, just to be clear, he has a PB of 2:04.51 from Seoul earlier in this year. He did run the World Championships where he ran 2:07. He also completed the Tokyo Olympic Games marathon just last year in 2021, although that didn't go well either. So he's got some history. He's 4 marathons in his past. He's got some history, but in 50% of them, he's absolutely blown to smithereens.
Yeah.
He went through the first half in 61:22.
It was insane. And that was kind of the conversation that took over the broadcast because it was so reckless, almost as if he had no advisor or didn't know the course or didn't read the conditions. He just went blindly. He may have thought from his training that he was in world record fitness, but you don't do that on New York City Marathon's course, and you don't do it when the temperatures are rising into the 70s and it's 80% humidity. It actually ended up raining later in the day. So the humidity, it was like you were in a cloud. It felt that thick.
And New York is well known for having a kind of harder second half, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's not an easy course to run a negative split or even paced.
So this guy collapses at mile 21, which I'm going to take that quite seriously because it is a serious observation in marathon runners. You know, when people get pacing wrong, it can be really serious. And, fortunately, he did look like he was in all sorts of trouble. But then I think he got medical support, and within about 45 minutes, and, he was kind of back again and he was okay, which is great. But there's a big lesson in how to approach marathon running. You shouldn't be doing that at that level, should you?
Right. Not at any level. I mean, that's why you train. You get feedback in your training so that you know the parameters that you should pace yourself, starting with mile 1. And so I think it's an important lesson for everybody. He got it very wrong. And to see the video coverage of his legs just giving out and hitting the pavement was horrifying to witness. In fact, the next morning, my very first thought when I woke up in my New York City hotel room was, I hope he's okay. And I text Sam Grotwald, the professional athlete director, first thing in the morning, before coffee even, and said, how's Do Nascimento doing? And he sent me a picture from the previous night where they're both in their suits and they both have big smiles on their faces. And so he did recover very well thanks to the medical support he did get immediately.
Yeah, we've seen that before with Callum Hawkins, who is a Scottish and Great Britain runner. He's done that in the Commonwealth Games. He's got a bit of a reputation for going out hard and then seeing if he can hang on. In this case, Daniel Nascimento didn't, and he left the door wide open for Evans Chebet, of course, in doing so. What was it like, seeing Evans Chebet come through? He's the first man to win Boston and New York City in the same year since Jeffrey Mutai in 2011.
Right. And just the sense of control he had. You have to respect anybody that goes out hard in a race and keep them in your sights and then be methodical and reeling them back in because you don't want to burn the sugars. You want to stay in the right energy system. And so just the patience again that he had to just slowly reel him in. But imagine the confidence you have to just watch someone go and then slowly reel them back in. It just speaks to Evans Chebet's preparation for this race, just the confidence and the knowledge. I think that's someone that could be a very good leader for professional runners everywhere, is to just prepare the best you can and then have confidence in that preparation that the race can go out any which way and you can still win it.
And it's one of the great approaches of marathon running, successful marathon running, isn't it? Is you can control what you do, but you can't control what everybody else does, and sometimes if you're in a particularly competitive environment, you have to make decisions on, do I go with the group? Do I sit back? Do I run my own race? Particularly if you're aiming for a time, or a finish position and there's a bit of pressure on you. You have to make those decisions. And of course, Evans Chebet made the decision. Patient pack, I think you called it. Hang back, patient pack. Maybe he had some prior knowledge of Daniel De Nascimento, maybe he knew, right? Okay, this guy's got a habit of going out fast. He's going to struggle in the second half. I'll reel him back.
Yeah, I think the impressive thing also is that there was a lot more on the line for Evans Chebet. In winning this race, it also tied him with Eliud Kipchoge for the Series 14 of the Abbott World Marathon Majors. And so it went, we alluded to it in our last show, then the race directors get together to break that tie. And I actually have a really funny picture on my phone in the VIP tent when I was done with my obligations, seeing all the race directors huddled around the table with their pens and papers and writing pros and cons lists, and then they took it back to the hotel and finished their conversations in a place where I wasn't eavesdropping, I guess, because I was considered a journalist in my hat there.
Tough decision, that, isn't it? Tough decision.
A really tough decision because Evans Chebet winning Boston and winning New York City, but then there's Eliud Kipchoge. I think the tiebreaker is because Eliud ran the world record in Berlin and the course record in Tokyo. So that inched him ahead of Evans Chebet.
And we never did get Ashton Kutcher after all. We did try, but there we go. He made his marathon debut. It was a successful one, actually. He ran sub 4 hours, 3:54. Good, strong run. It's
pretty impressive to see how well he ran, which means he prepared well. He raised more than $1 million for his charity Thorn, which is to combat sexual exploitation of children on the internet. So to raise over $1 million is just speaks to the extraordinary power that the marathon has in being able to raise awareness and funds. I will say that although he's a great advocate for his charity, he's not a very good advocate for running. I wrote down some of his quotes after the race. Training was pretty boring, he said. And I'm thinking, like, how does your... don't you get asked all the time, what do you think about when you're running? Well, there's a lot to think about. Like your brain is not a boring vessel, but maybe his is. He said it's brutal on the body and that at the end of the race, it felt like his nipples were falling off. So I'm not sure Ashton Kutcher's going to run another marathon, but he raised a lot of money and did not make training or racing seem that fun.
Well, it was successful for the people that will benefit. I tell you, the women's race, now that dealt a little bit of a surprise, didn't it? It was a debutante who won the race. But she does have some NCAA history if you're a follower of distance running in the US in particular.
Yeah, I mean, she was an NCAA champion out of college. I think she struggled a little to find her stride on the track and on the roads, but she certainly took to the longer distances. She said she loved the training, opposite of Ashton Kutcher. She loved the longer training runs and really found herself in that long marathon focus, just logging the work day in and day out. And to be honest, she was always in the race, but never in the lead. And I think you see that a lot in New York City in particular, is that if you sit quietly in the pack and you do the least amount of work and just get brought along for the ride, when it's your time to go, you're going to know. And she was showing a lot of teeth in that last 600 meters of the race. She was going to the well for that win, but to be walking away from Lona Salpeter of Israel, who's the bronze medalist at the World Championships this summer, Gotchetam Ghebreselassie, the gold medalist from the World Championships this summer. So it was actually Lona Salpeter and Gotchetam Ghebreselassie who were duking it out behind Sharon Lokedi. If Lona Salpeter won the New York City Marathon, she would have won the Abbott World Marathon Major 14. Series champion.
But she didn't.
So it was a fun unfolding.
Yeah, absolutely. And yet again, seeing we've spoken about this pretty much on every show about the standard of women's elite marathon running across the globe at the moment, and another star potentially in the making here. We've seen, I think, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of the top 10 times in history run this year by female performances. We saw, a 2:17 at Hamburg, a 2:17 at London, a 2:17 at Nagoya, a 2:17 in Amsterdam. Bridget Kosgei running 2:16 in Tokyo. Chetngetic just recently running 2:14 in Chicago. So women's marathon running next year is looking like it's going to be fairly epic. I've got to mention this one story, Deena, that I saw, and I just love it. And look, it's a tough story with a lot of history, but I'm going to give it a quick mention because it was a run with really some background. It's from Pascal Helminski, who entered the New York City Marathon some 30 years ago, but didn't get to complete it. She didn't get to complete it 30 years ago because she was, unfortunately, in 1993, she was attacked whilst out training. And so she didn't get to do the run. In fact, it took her a long time to recover from the attack. Well, she did it this year. So after 30 years, she towed the line and completed this year's New York City Marathon in 8 hours and 17 minutes. Now that to me is a story of amazing commitment, amazing strength, and like closure of a 30-year story in New York. That's one of the things that I love about marathon running, is that it can enable somebody to bring like closure to such a significant, important time in, an event in her life. What a way, what a thing to conquer through marathon running. Pascal Helminski, well done.
That is such an incredible story. In crossing that finish line, she got her power back, right? I mean, it really does take courage to move on past that fear. It's the ultimate courageous move. And so that is one of those heartwarming stories, one of the 50,000 stories that are out there. But I just imagine that moment, having control in your life for so long, and that commitment and persistence that it took to finally complete that journey and put it behind her. I hope she has a lot of safe miles ahead of her.
Yeah, good. Great results, of course, from Susanna Scaroni and Marcel Hoog too. Susanna won in 1:43.04, Marcel in 1:25.26. Great day's work for both of those two wheelchair athletes, also becoming the Abbott World Marathon Major Series championships on the same day.
And they both broke course records. It was a very lucrative day for both of them. Susanna Scaroni was in episode 2 of Marathon Talk. And the great Edna Kiplagat, who we talked about earlier, in this race, in the New York City Marathon, she was 4th in the women's race. But that gave her, in her 24 Abbott World Marathon major runs, she has finished in the top 5 19 times.
Wow.
It's a good testament of this show, right? We give people some good mojo to go and get into their next competition. But Susanna Scaroni, back-to-back wins. Chicago, it was her first World Marathon major win, and then winning in Chicago. I feel like Marcel Hoog is just used to winning, right? Do you think it ever gets old? Maybe it doesn't get old. I mean, he's just used to crossing that finish line first. But Susanna Scaroni is so excited that this was really her year to shine.
It's not all been about the TCS New York City Marathon, though. It's been quite a busy time and certainly quite an interesting time across the marathoning world. Dublin took place the week before New York. And a slightly crazy story has emerged about a member of the police force. I mean, he reportedly works in anti-corruption, who used a slightly interesting way of getting to the finish line that wasn't covering all 26.2 miles on foot, was it?
I just could not believe this story when I saw it. He used a tram to get to the finish. He was logging 10-minute miles and then just jumped up to 6-minute miles as he finished in the top 6% of his field. Like, that certainly is going to raise some suspicions. It certainly did. As soon as it was spotted, he admitted it and handed back his medal and his t-shirt. Can you imagine him hanging this medal in his office and being like, the representation of cheating, and he is an anti-corruption officer? Maybe he's just learned from the best in the field.
It's not good, is it? Like, what's really, really challenging is when you make the decision. Like, I'm intrigued. Does somebody make the decision to get on the tram in the race? You know what? If I get on the tram here, then I can still make the finish, still pick up my medal. So,
or was it premeditated?
Yeah, or was he thinking, is it planned? Like, I'm gonna have, like, need to get on the tram here and then get off. He's actually been banned from competing in the Dublin Marathon for life.
I feel like that's fair. Any style of cheating, no matter whether it's drugs or getting on a bus, I think should come with a lifetime ban. But I'm not the one making the rules.
It's not the first time it's happened in marathon running either. There's been some very famous marathon cheating moments involving slightly different ways of making it to the finish line before. I remember specifically Rob Sloan, who ran the Kielder Marathon in 2011, and he got on the bus. He came third in the race, and he got on the bus. So there you go. Jason Scotland Williams also ran London Marathon in 2014. He knocked 4 hours off his previous London Marathon time. He finished in just over 3 hours, which is all very doable until you realise he ran the second half quicker than Mo Farah did, which is questionable, to say the least.
Yeah, that's eyebrow raising for sure. And everybody remembers Rosie Ruiz in the 1980 Boston Marathon, who jumped in with a mile to go and was exposed a little more than a week later by Runner's World magazine. So there's cheaters out there. I'm not sure where their motivation comes to do that. But do you remember the Matsoening brothers, the Sergio and Fika? They shared the burden of the Comrades Marathon in 1999. I mean, they went through this was definitely a premeditated one, right? Let's all be at the halfway point. We'll swap bib numbers and shoes and in the toilet nonetheless, and then jump back on the course. And I mean, it was found out, of course, but maybe someone gets away with it. I wonder if there's a time where people are actually getting away with it because they've outthought, like,
Probably.
Oh, I'm not going to run faster than Mo Farah in my second half.
This is like the Comrades one's a little bit like that film Parent Trap. Do you remember that?
I love that. I love that
Remember the
movie.
film Parent Trap? You can just imagine that, like, planning this, these two guys planning, well, we could win comrades here. We could win comrades. They secured a 10th place. The only reason they got caught is because in photos, one of them had switched their watch from left to right, and there's a scar on his left shin that wasn't on the other one's shin. So they must have done some analysis of the two of them in the race, thinking, well, I wonder if they ran it all.
I mean, I think if you're a twin, I would use that power of having someone that looks like me to like do better for the world, right? Let's be twice as amazing, not see how you could cheat your way through life.
Can we top 10 in comrades?
Oh my goodness.
On this week's Marathon Talk, I am joined by Ben Wickham. Ben is a finisher of 44-ish, we couldn't quite remember how many he's done, marathons, including all of the Abbott World Marathon Majors. So he's a 6-star finisher. He ran his first marathon in London in 2010, but he also has done Berlin in 2012, London again in 2012. His run in 2010 is actually an 11-streak run of doing London. He's did Boston in 2014 and 2019, Tokyo in 2017, early doors, New York City, with a 10-year hiatus. Coming back this year, just recently in 2022. We're going to hear a lot about that run shortly. His day job is he is the creative director of output for Sky Sports. In his job, he covers Premier League football, Formula One, all the golf, majors, international cricket, boxing, darts, NFL coverage in the UK. We're going to find out a lot more about Ben's 6-star journey, and we're going to start it with New York City just gone. Anyway, Ben, happy 10th anniversary, because in the interest of full transparency, I've also coached you for the last decade.
You have, and it's wonderful to be here, Martin. We've just been reminiscing about old training plans. It's been all sorts of fun.
We have, because I actually clicked open one or two of Ben's training plans from 10 years ago. It was fascinating to see some of his now infamous feedback around rescheduling races or dropping races into the plan at the last minute. Ben, when you first kicked off running London in 2010, was it always an aspiration to complete major marathons around the world? Or did you think, I'm just going to go run London and then that'll be it?
I didn't even think about running London, to be honest with you. I just had this idea that I'd got to a stage in my life where I saw these people running marathons and thought, I wonder if I can do that. And it seemed like this incredibly difficult thing to do. And as I took on the training, I realised it was an incredibly difficult thing to do. And then I got the bug really quickly, and I just enjoyed the training more and more. And as you got more fit and enjoyed it more, and when I actually came to run London, it was just such an epic day. And cards on the table, it was a difficult day. It didn't go quite how I planned it to be, but that effectively just got me in that kind of mode of like, right, I want to go back, I want to do that again, I want to experience that high again. And I never stopped. And I think from that point on, I've done sort of 3 marathons a year, I think, every year since then.
Yeah, we've been running marathons for now 12 years. And yeah, we reckoned it was around about 44, including all the marathons. You ran your PB 2:42. I'll give you a little mention for that in 2012. But one of the things I've learned from working with you for a long time is that your actual marathon range is really quite consistent. Like most of your marathons, if you look back, are probably between 2:48 and 2:58, maybe.
Yeah, there's a couple of outliers there where I had some particularly bad days, but then, yeah, generally, like I can usually put them somewhere between kind of like, on a really good day under 250, on a worse day somewhere a little bit over 3, but that's sort of somewhere in my range.
Okay, so what is the single greatest draw for you personally in running a marathon? Like, what is it that gives you the most back?
Oh, there's so many things. I mean, I think that you know this. I love doing major marathons because I love being part of that event. And over the years, I've gone from kind of being really, really excited about the times that I'm running to being much more excited about just running hard in a big city. I love that. I love that kind of thing. But it is about doing that training, and it's about putting yourself against 26 miles. And just there's nothing I like more than a cannon going off, running at a pace, and thinking, I'm going to see if I can hold this for the next well, hopefully the next sort of 240 something, but potentially the next 3 hours something, potentially even longer depending on how the day's going. But like just not knowing what that day's going to hold and just learning as you go along and learning about yourself as you go along. I just think it's brilliant.
And I think over 10 years of running marathons with you, your focus has actually shifted, and it's shifted very much away from early days of committing to a time, and committing to a performance goal, to now committing to the journey of completing the marathon in its sort of varied form, whatever that might be, and being happy with the process.
Yeah,
would you say that?
Yeah, 100%. If I ran 2 minutes slow, I'd do a marathon training block. I'd want to break a certain time. I'd do all the training. I'd get up on the Sunday morning, I'd run all the miles. And if I missed my time by 2 minutes, 3 minutes, I would be kicking myself. We'd have to have words. We'd have that kind of that week where you're like, oh, right, I've got to start with that again. And over the time, I've realised that as much as I still like performing, I still like running hard, and I still like, I like that feeling of going as hard as you possibly can. You sort of fast forward to last weekend, and it was all going pretty south on me running through the park, and I was actually still standing there thinking, I'm still loving this. Like this is miles off what I want it to be, but I'm still absolutely loving this because I'm still part of this event. I've been there, I've done that. I'm just enjoying not just the marathon itself, but all the miles beforehand, the getting up early in the morning and just, being out on my own, and, your running club, all those things. It's much more holistic the way I kind of treat these things these days.
And do you find that gives you a more what are the differences in impact for you as a person that approach has over the former approach? What have you noticed in benefits or limitations of both?
I mean, limitations. I think there's still. I won't lie. There's still a bit of you kind of like I remember what it feels like to be that kind of that incredibly fit where you've squeezed every last % out of your body and everything's perfect and everything's you're in great shape, and that's why it's frustrating when you don't hit the time that you want to hit. But like it's such a narrow focus. I've come to realize this is such a narrow focus, and I've run some great times and I've run in great places, but actually, for me, it's much more about like I can get up in the morning and I can go for a run. And if I decide I want to just run to a coffee shop and have a coffee and come back, that's fine. And I don't have to think, oh my God, that's a wasted day. Like there was so much focus around the other things that it kind of devours a bit too much of your life, I think, at some point. And I've got to the point where actually there's other things going on in my life that I want to kind of concentrate on. And I can actually maintain a really high level of running and enjoy it, but not feel like it's, eating into the other parts of my life too much.
So should we talk about New York City this year? It was recently, TCS, New York City Marathon. You were there. Why a 10-year break? I mean, come on.
Well, firstly, it's not easy getting to New York, right? It's expensive. It's difficult. It's one of the more, it's a very much a destination one. I ran it in 2011 and just had the absolute time of my life. I've got friends in New York, and I love the city. But it just never really happened. And I've got a gang of friends who we were kind of running the marathon majors. So like we were concentrating on Chicago and Boston and Berlin and, and Tokyo and all those other things. And like it's an expensive sport, right? It's difficult to get these things doing. It just never happened, right? So, but I got to the point of, I think it was 2018 or 2019. I was right. I haven't done New York for ages. I'd love to do New York. I'm lucky enough to get a qualifying time. So I put my entry in. I was like, 2020, that's the year I'm going to run New York. And of course, as we know, the world has other ideas. So 2020 didn't happen. 2021 didn't happen for the same reason. So 2022 was a much delayed, somewhat triumphant return to New York. And
we had a little conversation at the end of New York about your run. And, well, it was a 3:06 run.
It was actually a 3:08, it turns out. My watch was doing something weird. Yeah, it's a 3:08. I'm sorry to say, yeah. Because everyone's going to look it up now and be like, hang on a minute, no, you said it was 3:06. It was definitely 3:08.
We've just had that wonderful conversation about how you're focusing on the process and you're not so bothered about times. And then you go and pipe in.
I can't lie on marathon talk.
So 3:08 in New York. And if you don't mind me saying, the trip around Central Park was, as it can be sometimes in a marathon, quite a challenge.
I think the trip around Central Park was the denouement of a fairly difficult few miles before that. It was, I mean, anyone that's run New York knows this, and anyone that's about to run New York or is thinking of running New York should know this. The difficulty accumulates as you go along. And I was running well. I was enjoying it. It was a very, very hot day. A lot of people have said that it's an incredibly hot day. So I was probably, a bit more effort than I needed to. But you have big run up First Avenue, which is kind of rolling, and that was taking a lot out of my legs, but still fine. And then you hit a couple of bridges going into the Bronx, and I kind of knew at that point this wasn't going well. So I thought, right, just jog it in, ride it in, you'll be fine. And then as you come up to the park, there's a big hill that goes into the park on Fifth Avenue, and that just broke me, and my legs were screaming at the top of that. I was barely moving forward. And then you go into the park, and it's all up and down. So the park was I kind of knew the park was going to be bad, but like I said, I was still enjoying myself at every point. I just wasn't moving forward as fast as I'd want to.
So what is it? You make a really good point when you say New York is one of those marathons. And every marathon does this to a certain extent, right? Every marathon accumulates. Yeah. Whenever I'm supporting somebody, running a marathon, I'll always say, look, it really is 26.2 miles. It's not 18. Yeah. And what you've just said is, okay, so for New York, that accumulation is almost amplified, like it's magnified. Yeah. Why?
Hugely. So the first sort of 14 miles, let's say, are they're not flat. Like you go over the bridge at the start, which is actually quite a big uphill, and then a downhill. And there's a couple of hills in Brooklyn, which are, they're not flat, but compared to the rest of the course, it's essentially a relatively easy sort of first half. And then there's these kind of famous bits where you kind of go at the Queensboro Bridge, where you suddenly go, there's a sort of a mile and a half, 2 miles of where you're going up and down bridges, and there's no spectators around, and it's a very, very long uphill, which takes a lot out of your legs. Then you run down to First Avenue, and that rolls around a bit. And they're also it's a quite harsh environment. There's lots of pavement. It's hot, as it was the other day, and it never really relents. You're either going uphill or downhill. And then as you kind of come into the Bronx, then you're hitting more bridges. It rolls around a bit more on Fifth Avenue, like I said, and then they just there's just a really nice, about a mile of just straight, hill to go into the park, which is then hilly and rolling. So the hills come quicker and faster, and they get more severe. They're never huge, but they're just relentless, which after a long hot run is difficult.
And so what do you think were the major contributors to that accumulation being more noticeable in the slowdown in New York specifically? Was it, okay, the humidity? Yeah. Deena said the humidity was a particular challenge. But what about personally for you in the race? Was it, lack of depth in prep? Was it going out too quickly? What were the personal things that you did in New York City to realise,
Yeah. So I mean, this well about me, Martin. I tend to kind of like run for a best case scenario and then hope it happens. So that's over the many marathons I've done, it probably happens 1 in every 10 maybe. And I'm kind of comfortable with that ratio. But so I kind of knew that I was running at a pace that would be potentially difficult to maintain on a good day. And it wasn't a good day in the sense of it was warm and it was humid. But I could tell from mile 2, it was, I was very, very hot. My top was all wet through, and sweat was dripping into my eyes. I was like this, and it suddenly realised this is much hotter than I thought it would be. At that point, I should have made a decision and backed off a bit, but I made the decision to just kind of go with it and see what happened. And like I said, coming back to why I run marathons, like I want to put myself against 26 miles. I'm happy to kind of get to the point. I know I can finish it now, so I'm happy to kind of get to 22 miles and realise I've got it wrong more times than I get it right, and hope that one of those times might be glorious. So I was perfectly okay with that. I'm just going to keep running this at this pace and hope it comes off.
And so when you look back at your Abbott World Marathon major journey, we said you've done London 11 times,
yep,
Boston a couple of times, Tokyo, New York a couple of times, Berlin once. Like, which of those do you look back and think, that was just the most amazing experience of any of the majors that I've done? And why was that the case?
Oh, it's really difficult. Anyone who's run them all will tell you that they've all got their own things. Like I'm such a huge fan of London because it's my hometown. It's just down the road from me. I know where my running club's going to give me a shout. I know where my friends are going to be. It's like a big party of people I know and people in my running community. So London is always my thing. And Tokyo has an incredible feeling experience. I think the first time I ran Boston was just incredible because it was, Boston is such an amazing thing to be able to do, to qualify to run Boston. It's such an epic course, and the the support out there, and the fact that I went from being someone who thought I might like to try this marathon running thing to suddenly qualifying for Boston, like it felt like such a moment in my kind of running world, as it were. But I mean, I still have to say, and this is why I went back to New York, the point at which you get off the Queensboro Bridge and run down to First Avenue is just the most incredible moment in marathon running that you can possibly get. And for anyone that's never done it before, I would, say do everything you can to get to New York, because it's the mile and a half that you run over the Queensborough Bridge, where there's no spectators and all you can hear is other people sweating and punting and grunting and all the, feeling awful and running uphill and just generally not enjoying their life choices. And then you just see this roar of this crowd coming, and the first time I ever did it, I didn't know what it was. I thought it was like a river or something. Like this incredible roar comes at you, and Manhattan just opens out in front of you at the same time as you get tens of thousands of people yelling at you, and it's just, you just go from nothing to everything in a moment. And it's like that moment is just epic. Like I would run it, I'd run 26 miles many, many times over just to keep getting that feeling. It's epic. It
sounds like the feeling you get as a bike rider beginning the Alpe d'Huez, in the Tour de France, and suddenly you perhaps been on quieter open roads. And I've not run New York, but you're on quieter open roads, and then all of a sudden, pop, you're going past switchbacks, and it's going absolutely insane.
It's the whole race though is contrast all the way along. Like it's everything about it is very filmic. You run over the bridge at the start, and you can see Manhattan, and they had NYPD helicopters flying above you, and like that's quiet because there's no crowd there. Then suddenly you land in Brooklyn, and there's crowds everywhere, and like it's like a tunnel of noise. Like my watch has this thing that tells you when you're hitting 100 decibels, and it kept going off during the marathon. Just this people shouting at you, and sometimes they're 8 inches from your face, and sometimes you're on a big 8-lane highway and they're miles away from you. But and then then there's the bridges that are quiet, and then there's other bits where there's sound systems all up the whole. So it's a constantly changing, rolling kind of carnival of people that you're kind of part of, and it's so the whole race it keeps delivering the whole way through. Even as we've discovered, you end up walking some of it.
And you're quite a visual person, so even in the way in which you're describing your personal experience of running New York, you're almost setting up for me in like a mouth-watering way. You're setting up, you're describing the scene, but that is in your day job. That's what you do for a living, right? So you're kind of almost we're blending some of your personal experiences as a runner who's done major marathons around the world, and then what you're explaining is what that looks and feels like actually from a participant's point of view.
Yeah.
What does that mean for you in a professional capacity? So a question would be how sometimes, I'll be really open here, like sometimes when you watch a marathon on TV and your main media is television, when you watch a marathon on television, it can be quite a struggle. It can be. Sometimes there's a lot of excitement going on. So I'm thinking London here, London, amazing event to watch on the TV. So much happening, so much coverage. What, in your experience as director of creative for Sky Sports, so working in the field that you do, like, what does that lens look like when you flip it to, okay, now I want to see the marathon from the outside looking in? You've just described the inside looking out.
Firstly, I think that the two are sort of concurrent. Like, I mean, obviously, listen, I don't think anyone's going to be following me with TV coverage on a marathon, but the same sort of thing holds true. Like, what I always try and do what we try and do in our kind of work environment is like give that access and understanding are the two things that I always want to, bring to the viewer, bring to the customer. You're there, it's visceral. Like, where are the microphones? Where are the cameras? Where are, what are we tracking? What are we seeing? I want to be able to feel right in there in, the best seat in the house. So getting up close and personal with the athletes, but also getting up close and personal with the event. Like, as we all know, like marathons can sometimes look very similar. There's a couple of cutaway shots or whatever, but like, we all know from running them, Tokyo is different from London, it's different from Boston, it's different from New York, and understanding that and actually seeing that, trying to get that from a participant's view, I think is really interesting, and how we could potentially do that. Because let's face it, Kipchoge is running the same races I'm running at, he's experiencing the same things, and Kipla, she's running the same streets as me at the same time, and I think there's something about marathon running which is epic, and I'm not sure we quite capture the magic of that, of how we're all out there at the same time and doing it. And I don't think we quite capture some of the stresses and the strains and the how we could understand the kind of rhythm of that race and how it does move and flow, and how the people around you do change the the timbre of how it's going and the pace everyone's running at. And I think, and also I think there is something to be said about increasing the depth, telling more stories of more runners, and maybe coming back. There tends to be in all kind of running coverage tends to be here's the first 3 people, and then we're going to cut to the guy wearing a clown suit at the back. And I think there's something in the middle there which is really beautiful and really, that we could kind of learn from. But there's definitely a kind of flavour that I think I'd want to see more of, maybe on coverage of marathons.
I think there's what's ringing to me here is, running is an amazing way for people to tell stories, and we hear so many great stories about people that run.
Yeah.
But if we flip that and we say, well, how do people tell the stories about the run?
Yeah.
It's like, because the two things do go hand in hand, and there's fascinating depth to a running race.
Yeah.
Like we're both, well, you probably more than me, like stats and data, and the way in which that can tell the story of participation in an event. And certainly, in recent times with some of the, developments around breaking 2 hours in marathon, we've seen the introduction of new ways to participate from a distance in that race. What else would you like to see that would help us feel a part of a race from the stories of the participants whilst we're watching it, like on the internet or on the television?
I think so. It's also bringing people in, and I think marathon running is at its very kind of core is very simple. You pull trainers on, you go out, you run a race. It's very simple. Everyone knows how to do it, and I think that gives it a universal appeal that is absolutely fantastic, and and brings all the kind of benefits we know it does. But actually, the nerdy kind of specifics of the actual what's going on in the race and what paces people are running and how they're even just how their sugar levels are going or what drinks they're taking and how that's affecting their pace and what's going on with the gaps and all those sort of things. Like, it's a story that it's quite difficult to tell without getting quite geeky and nerdy about it. I think what we need to do better of broadcasters is, yes, use those stats and use those data, but tell the human story behind them and really understand what that means. I think coverage of things like the Tour de France are better at that, I think, sometimes than running, in the sense that you get a personality, and there's a real kind of up close about that personality, and there's a real understanding of how that race is morphing and changing and developing. And I think that using that data kind of to understand the real story of that, and then be able to tell that story, which I think we always get really well in commentary in races, but I think probably not so much in terms of the visuals, and bring everyone in so they understand. Breaking 2 was a really obvious story that was told very well by Nike. I think we need to do that on all the kind of races, because there's so much going on. There's so much going on in all different places. Like, even when I was out in New York, like, I was running around Central Park, and like all of the elite wheelchair races were obviously on some sort of session on the Friday afternoon. And I just think that there's even understanding the build up to that and understanding what it takes to get to the stage. Like, these people just pop up on the start of a marathon and they run it, and it's incredible. And we go away and we think, well, that was a minute faster than last year or whatever. I think actually understanding what went into that. The marathon is the easy bit. The marathon is the bit where, like, understanding where you got to there, I think, is there's a story there, which is we've never really mined.
And isn't there an amazing thing, an amazing experience about seeing any group of athletes, but particularly a group of wheelchair athletes out training?
Yeah.
I was privileged to see, that kind of stuff in London. And, the best athletes in the world pushing the streets as hard as they can possibly go is a spectacle, because it's the noise. Yeah. Yeah. Right? Especially as a group. Like, it's the noise and the frenzy almost. It is such an incredible spectacle.
That's what's amazing about running as well. Like this, and I'd say this about New York. If anyone ever does New York, I would say, like, go out for a run, like Friday afternoon or Friday morning. Just go for a run around the park, because, like, you get the world. Such an incredible city. All these people have come in to do it, and to be out running just what is just effectively just a local park with like 3 or 4 world's greatest wheelchair athletes flying past you. And you can hear, like, this goes back to telling stories. You can hear their breathing, and you can hear how hard they're working. And like, that's a privilege. Like, you don't.
Should I jump out of the way?
But do you know what I mean? Like,
I need to dive in the bushes.
We do everything we can, but you're not going to go down to your local park and see someone, a Premier League footballer having a kickabout, or it doesn't happen like that. It's all closed away from you. So just to be out and seeing that sort of stuff is incredible.
And perhaps being better at telling the story of the people that make the races.
Yeah.
And then on event day itself.
And trusting. I think sometimes we think that the race is almost secondary. We want there's a lot of backstory sometimes, but I think the actual story of the race and the effort that it takes to go into the race, I think trusting that, like, it's a sporting spectacle, and when someone breaks away with half a mile to go at the back end of a marathon, like, that's an impressive thing to be doing. That's one of the great achievements of endurance sport, and trusting people that actually they can accept that and understand that without having to kind of, go into the backstory of that person. Sometimes, the sporting event in and of itself is impressive.
The spectacle there and then in the moment.
Yeah.
And being able to showcase that.
Yeah.
Being able to showcase that immediately.
Yeah.
And have all the kind of tools in your armory, in your box, to be able to go, this is what's happening right now. And doesn't that make for sporting spectacles? Yeah. That is that's what people remember, right? People remember, do you remember the World Cup from?
Yeah.
Do you remember the fight between?
Yeah.
Do you remember the...
Yeah.
And in sport, and running including, it can come down to amazing moments, solitary, amazing single moments that define an event.
Yeah.
And being able to showcase those is what makes an event memorable.
Yeah, and we can tell those stories of those events, and we can, even go back and, you can pick out where, mile 7 when the bottle was dropped, and this, and the things that changed it. And just the more we educate the viewer, and the more we educate people to understand this wonderful sport that we're involved in, I think the more people would just naturally kind of tend toward, feeling like they want to bat for the athletes who are doing it.
And so, okay, a couple of questions to finish us off, Ben. Would you rather, not for you, but for the event, like fast race, competitive race? So one guy running 2:01, 10 guys running 2:05.
I think 10 guys.
Or women running as we've seen in global women's running, women running under 2:18, 2:17, or one woman running 2:12.
Listen, I think the fascinating thing of both, like, I love it when I'm running a race and I'm in a pack of people, and I think, who's going to be the last one standing here? Like, I love that, and I love seeing that on people's faces. And I think that to me is the exciting thing, is watching a pack disappear and splinter and thinking who's going to be next. Like, I find that fascinating.
Okay, and what about for you? So for you personally, we haven't really spoken about this yet in terms of your coaching, but you've also done some pretty successful Ironman races in your time, and that's still very much in the future for you. But what about in running terms? You've done all the marathon majors. You've got a 2:42 PB. Like, what is still sticky about global marathoning?
Oh, what's still sticky about global marathoning is the fact that is the thing that I return to. It's the thing that I love beyond anything else. Friends of mine joke about it. Like, lots of friends of mine do kind of trail runs and ultras and that kind of thing. And, like, give me 26.2 miles of tarmac in a big city, and I'm absolutely the happiest I can be. And I love being part of that. And even when I think I might be done with this, I turn up at a race weekend and I think it's the best thing in the world. Like, I hope I never stop doing this. I'll be honest with you. Whatever that looks like, being on the streets of New York just reminded me of how epic this sport is.
Ben, thank you. Been a pleasure to catch up with you. Thanks for joining us on Abbott World Marathon Majors Marathon Talk.
Thanks for having me, Martin.
In each show, we will feature an Abbott World Marathon Majors 6 questions with a 6-star finisher. And we'll be sharing with our 6-star finishers a regular opportunity to finish on the show. Deena and I go through a big long list and we pick one that stood out to us. And today, our 6-star finisher is Jonhard Larsson from the Faroe Islands, who completed, I think, his 6-star finish I could be wrong here, in 2022. I should know this, but I'm going to go through his most memorable experiences anyway. It was when he finished the Berlin Marathon, which is his first in 2002, crying his way over the finish line. These are his words, not mine. His favourite iconic landmark, Tower Bridge. He says that was breathtaking. One thing, you wish you'd known how long it was to drive to the start line in Boston. I didn't manage to pee, says Jonhard Larsen from the Faroe Islands, before I got on the bus, so my bladder was about to burst. I'm sure that's ringing true with a few people who know that. The most support in New York, 2010, having my family cheering me, being so cheerful throughout the race. I missed my sub 3 by 17 seconds. His fastest World Marathon major was London in 2004, planning for 250. I made 2:54:20, he says, including taking a leak 3 times. So Jonhard, that's like 1 minute and 20 seconds per leak. You needed to like drink less, lesson from Boston, then maybe you'd have got that 250. Anyway, what a fantastic Abbott World Marathon Majors 6-star finisher.
So, Martin, what are you up to until we speak again in a couple of weeks?
Well, I'm going to try and do another session. I'm doing a lot with the kids at the moment. It's busy time in our house with the kids, busy season with all the clubs and things that they do. Going to watch a football game, busy working hard on Stormbreak, which is the charity that I run in the UK. Yeah, so generally busy. What about you?
Well, you got me thinking about winter running goals. And so I decided that when the storms come, I'm just going to run in it, right? So that's going to be my, just to feel a part of winter here. So I'm really excited for that, for being able to fulfill some fun winter running, even if I have to run in my husband's ski goggles.
So Deena, tell me a little bit, because what's that actually mean for you? So when the weather gets a bit because I can remember talking to a friend of mine, I think years ago, and they lived I've forgotten where they lived in the US, but it used to go to about minus 25, and the weather was so cold, and they'd be like, should I go running? Should I not go running? Like, what does it mean to experience the real elements in Mammoth when you go running?
So I live in California in the mountains, so we don't get negative 20, but we do get a significant amount of snow. The snow that just fell, I was actually trying to drive home from the airport to chase a storm, to get here before the storm, dropped 8 feet of snow this week here in the mountains. So we have 8 feet of snow, fresh snowfall outside. Now it's a sunny, gorgeous day, but it's fun. You might drive toward the lakes basin, so maybe a kilometer away from the house where it's a little safer and there's no cars on the road, and just run up the groomed cross-country ski trails, but the snow's pelting you in the face and you just feel so gnarly getting out in the elements. So I'm going to get my gnarly on this winter and have fun.
Yeah, Deena's getting gnarly this winter. Brilliant. Yes,
and it's in the United States. Thanksgiving is coming up. We host a little turkey trot here locally, so I make pumpkin cheesecakes for the winners and also to raffle off. So I'm in pumpkin cheesecake making mode. And then I'm going to the running event in Austin, Texas, which is kind of an industry event. There's a lot of meetings and dinners and group runs. So some fun things to look forward to before the holidays.
Fantastic. I'm really excited to hear how the pumpkin making goes in the next few weeks. Can't wait to see. You got to send me some pictures of those. That's really important. More important than you going to a running event. Come on.
You bet.
Let's see some pumpkin making.
Maybe I'll share the recipe with our listeners. I'll share the recipe for pumpkin cheesecake.
Right, that's all for episode 4 of Marathon Talk, powered by Abbott World Marathon Majors. Thanks for joining us. Enjoy the run, wherever it takes you.